All right, folks, so in this video, we are going to talk about Mendelian genetics and how to use a Punnett square. This will be the first of 2 or 3 videos. So for some background, we are talking about simple genetics today. These are simple genetic trends that were first discovered by a monk named Gregor Mendel. Mendel's whole thing was that he bred pea plants, and he studied the way that traits were passed on from generation to generation. So because of Gregor Mendel, we call simple genetic patterns Mendelian. So anytime you see this word, Mendelian, we are talking about simple genetic patterns like we see with pea plants. So the main tool that we use to talk about these Mendelian genetics is called a Punnett square. It looks like this on the right. We're going to talk about what this is and how we read it. You might recognize this. If you recognize it, that's good. So these Punnett squares, these are tools that we use to predict how traits that 2 individuals' offspring might have. We're predicting the traits that 2 individuals' offspring might have. So you've got parents, they have babies. We are trying to predict what traits the babies would have. So we need to know some vocabulary first. So you have things called alleles and genotypes. Genotypes are made of alleles. Alleles are different variations possible for each trait, and we show them using one letter. So if you are talking about the gene for hair color, like we are in this example, brown hair would be one of the alleles, and we made it a capital B, and blonde hair is another allele, which is represented with lowercase b. So those are alleles. So when you have multiple alleles next to each other, when you have 2 alleles together, you get what we call a genotype. The genotype is the combination of alleles that one person has, and we represent a genotype with 2 letters. So I have a genotype for my hair color. Someone else will have a different genotype for their hair color. So there are 3 kinds of genotypes we're looking at right now. You could be homozygous dominant, meaning that you have 2 uppercase. You could be heterozygous, meaning you have a uppercase and a lowercase. Or if you're homozygous recessive, you have 2 lowercase alleles. So on this Punnett square, the parent alleles and the parent genotypes go on the outside. You will notice that I lined an allele up with each column. So this parent right here is heterozygous. 1 allele goes with the left column and 1 allele goes with the right column. That's on purpose. On the left, we have the other parent because, like I said, parent alleles go on the outside. We have 1 allele lined up with 1 row and another allele lined up with the other row. Now, on the inside, you have offspring genotypes. They go on the inside. So everything inside the square, these are our 4 possible offspring genotypes, and each square is as probabilistically likely as the others. So each square represents a 25% chance that this is the genotype that a child would have from these 2 parents. Moving on from there. Reading Punnett squares tells us whether a person's genotype is dominant or recessive for certain traits. So when we read this Punnett square, we're going to look and see whether or not each person has the dominant trait or the recessive trait. What does that mean? Dominant traits. If an allele is dominant, that means that this allele being there means that that trait is expressed. If the dominant allele is present, it will be expressed. Think of it like this allele is bossy. So for hair color, brown hair, the capital B is dominant. Dominant alleles are always capital. That is why brown hair is the capital B, because brown hair is dominant in nature, so we mark it with a capital letter. And if you have 1 allele for brown hair, it doesn't matter what your other allele is, you will have brown hair. Recessive alleles are kind of the opposite. A recessive allele will only be expressed if there is no dominant allele present. Think of it like they're shy. So blonde hair is my recessive allele. That's why it's lowercase. And for recessive blonde hair to be visible, we need for there to only be recessive alleles. So let's look at the example over here. And we're using our genotypes again now that we know what dominant and recessive means. Again, homozygous just means 2 of the same. Homozygous dominant is 2 dominant alleles. So, do I have any offspring with 2 dominant alleles? Yeah, 25% of my offspring, because it's 1 square, will have 2 dominant alleles. So 25% of the offspring are homozygous dominant. Now we're looking at heterozygous, 1 capital, 1 lowercase. Well, I have 2 squares that are heterozygous, And so together, that is 50%. I have a 50% chance that the offspring will be heterozygous. And then the last one, I have 25% homozygous recessive because I have one square that has lowercase b. So we are almost done once you get to this point. Once you have counted up how many of each genotype you have, you are ready for the next step. So once you understand what a person's genotype is, you can predict their phenotype. This is possible because genotype determines phenotype. So these letters are in charge. Whatever these letters say, that tells me what the phenotype is. But what's a phenotype? A phenotype is the physical attributes a person has. So whatever physical trait you have, that is your phenotype. So in this case, there are two possible phenotypes. Brown hair, which would be represented with anything with a dominant allele, and blonde hair is the other phenotype, represented by the homozygous recessive. So, to summarize this Punnett square here, I want to talk about how many offspring have brown hair and how many have blonde hair. So, again, looking at my Punnett square. This first one has the dominant allele, that means it's brown hair. The second one, dominant allele is here, so it has brown hair. This third one has the dominant allele, so it has brown hair. So together, this is 75% of the offspring have brown hair. And my last 25%, this last box on the bottom right, they are only recessive alleles here in this genotype. So that means that that 25% of the offspring would be blonde. So at the end of this problem, what we found out from looking at this Punnett square is that these parents have a 75% chance of having a child with brown hair and a 25% chance of having a child with blonde hair.